Most people are staring at the chaos of the shooting itself. The harder question sits somewhere else. It sits in the gaps, the timing, the movement, and the decisions that still do not make sense. What happened at the White House Correspondents' Dinner held at the Washington Hilton in Washington shocked the room in seconds and unsettled the political system far beyond it. Witnesses described panic, confusion, and a crowd of more than 2,000 attendees freezing as armed security rushed senior officials away. The location carried its own historical weight. This was the same hotel long associated with the attempted assassination of President Ronald Reagan. At the center of the incident was a man identified in the transcript as Allen. One early point of confusion concerns his condition after the attack. Some reports suggest that he was killed on the spot by Secret Service personnel, but the account examined here argues that he was not killed immediately, that he was subdued, arrested, forced to the ground, stripped of his upper garment, and photographed in a humiliating position. That detail mattered politically because the photograph did not remain inside a secure file. According to the account, Trump later posted the image on his own social media platform, turning the arrest into a public spectacle. The implication drawn from that act was simple. The president was not merely relieved, he was enraged. Then the profile of the gunman complicates the standard narrative. He was not described as a drifter, not as a visibly unstable outcast, not as a man who had obviously fallen outside society. Quite the opposite. He was presented as a high achiever. The transcript says Allen graduated from the California Institute of Technology, an institution placed in the same elite tier as the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in American public imagination. It further states that he later earned a master's degree in information engineering, or a closely related computing field, from the University of California. In other words, this was not a biography of collapse. It was a biography of talent. Former classmates, according to the account, described him as brilliant. He had demonstrated notable skill in game development during his student years and had even won a gold-level award in that field. By the usual metrics of modern American meritocracy, he had every reason to build a strong career, collect a high salary, and move deeper into the technology sector. Yet his actual path was said to be different. Instead of pursuing the most prestigious or stable roles available to someone with that resume, he moved through temporary work and, shortly before the shooting, was working as a teacher at a local tutoring school. Even there, the portrait remains striking. Students reportedly valued his teaching, and he was recognized as an excellent instructor. That contradiction forms one of the central tensions in the story. Why would a man with education, skills, social function, and future prospects choose a path that could only end in prison, death, or permanent ruin? Why would someone at 31, an age often seen as a professional launch point rather than a closing chapter, step into an attack on a sitting president? The answer proposed in the transcript comes from what it describes as a manifesto or final written statement. In that text, Allen allegedly expressed deep hatred not only for Trump, but also for the circle around him, described as flattering enablers and morally compromised officials. The grievance was not framed as personal disappointment. It was framed as national and even spiritual betrayal. On foreign policy, the statement reportedly condemned Trump's alignment with Israel, the handling of Gaza, and military pressure on Iran, all of which were said to have intensified instability in the Middle East. On domestic policy, it denounced immigration crackdowns and a wider climate of fear and division inside the United States. Layered on top of that was a religious dimension. The transcript describes Allen as a devout Christian who felt personally outraged by what he viewed as Trump's insults to God, Jesus, and Christian values. If that portrait is accurate, then ideology, faith, and moral disgust converge into a lethal political motive. Not madness, at least not in the simple sense, not social isolation alone. a belief that the system had become intolerable and that ordinary channels had failed. That does not justify the act, but it does change how one interprets it. The second major issue is the official label attached to the attack almost immediately. According to the transcript, both the Secret Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation moved quickly toward calling it a lone wolf operation. That classification on its face offers administrative clarity, but the account argues that it raises more questions than it answers. The claimed weapon set was a shotgun, a handgun, and multiple knives, with a long gun reportedly assembled shortly before the assault. The problem is not just the weapons themselves, it is how those weapons could have been positioned, assembled, and brought toward a high-security presidential event inside a major hotel under federal protection. The transcript says the attacker did not simply stroll through security, carrying all of this openly. Instead, it alleges that before passing through the metal detection area, he first entered a hotel employee break room. In that room, weapons or components were supposedly already waiting for him. There, according to this version, he assembled the long gun, prepared himself, and then moved toward the ballroom. If that sequence is true, the lone wolf theory weakens immediately. Weapons do not materialize in a staff room by accident. Someone would have had to move them there, conceal them there, and leave them in a location the attacker knew to use. That would imply at least logistical support, if not a broader conspiracy. This is the point where the transcript becomes less a declaration and more an interrogation. So if there was a pre-positioned cache inside the venue, who placed it there? Who had access? Was that person a hotel employee, an outside infiltrator, or someone tied to event operations? And if investigators truly believe no second actor was involved, what evidence gave them that confidence so early? Movement inside the hotel creates another knot. Witnesses in the account describe Alan moving with remarkable speed, even while wearing body armor and carrying multiple weapons. The suggestion goes further that his pace on video appeared faster than that of trained protective personnel pursuing him. That is not impossible, but it is not a trivial detail either. Body armor is weight, a shotgun or assembled long gun is weight, a handgun and knives add more weight, more drag, more complexity. So if the pursuing agents still failed to close distance quickly enough to stop him before he reached the banquet hall, the natural question is whether the chase unfolded exactly as later described. Then there is the sequence of shots. The account says that after Alen entered the hall, he still remained some distance from Trump, who was seated on the stage. One shot rang out, clearly attributed to the attacker, and then came roughly 7 more gunshots. That is where the reconstruction starts to fracture. If the attacker was being actively chased by trained Secret Service personnel, how did he have time and space to fire repeated additional rounds? On the other hand, if many of those later shots were fired by agents, why did they fail to neutralize him immediately? That tension sits at the center of the transcript's skepticism. A protected presidential event is not guarded by amateurs. These agents train for compression of time, crowd control under fire, target identification, and direct engagement. One shot getting off during the first breach is conceivable. A prolonged sequence that still ends with the attacker alive and physically subdued rather than shot dead feels, at minimum, operationally unusual. The transcript presses exactly there. If the shots after the first were fired by agents, why did none immediately stop him? If the shots after the first were fired by the attacker, how did agents permit that much continued action at such close range? Either version leaves an ugly residue. The comparison made in the account is with an earlier attempt on Trump in Pennsylvania on July 13, 2024, where a young sniper was reportedly killed quickly by return fire. The point is not that every incident unfolds the same way. The point is that in one case, a threat was ended at once, while in this case, according to the transcript, multiple shots were exchanged and the suspect still ended up captured alive. That does not prove foul play, but it does justify scrutiny, especially because the event was not held in a random private residence or an improvised outdoor rally. It was held in a major hotel at a marquee gathering with the president physically present in a venue with a long, famous security history, which leads to the third major area of doubt: advanced security preparation. The Washington Hilton is not just another ballroom, it is a symbolic site in presidential security history because of Reagan. Any protective detail familiar with institutional memory would treat that location with special seriousness. The transcript therefore asks a blunt question: where were the snipers? In a large hotel with multiple vantage points overlooking approaches to the event space, one would expect elevated overwatch positions, layered observation, and contingency lines of fire. Even if every detail of the protection plan is classified, the complete absence of visible or effective long-range interdiction strikes the narrator as deeply strange. Again, this is not a claim that no sniper teams existed anywhere on the property. It is a claim that nothing in the publicly visible sequence suggests they altered the attack. If a gunman can move from a staff area toward the banquet hall, fire inside the venue, and still survive to be pinned on the floor afterward, then either the protection bubble was breached in a very unusual way, or parts of the defensive design failed all at once. The fourth issue is even more sensitive because it touches succession, continuity, and national command risk. The transcript states that the President, the Vice President, the First Lady, the Secretary of State, the Speaker of the House, and the Treasury Secretary were all present at the same time. Whether every position named was indeed there would need independent confirmation, but the core concern is clear: too many top officials in one room. In standard continuity of government thinking, concentration of leadership creates a point of catastrophic vulnerability. A single successful attack, a coordinated assault, or even a panic-induced stampede can become more than a security breach. It can become a constitutional shock. That is why the visual sequence after the shots mattered so much. According to the account, the first priority of the protective response appeared to be the Vice President's evacuation. Only after he was moved did arrangements fully turn to Trump's exit. To viewers already suspicious of internal division, that ordering looked less like protocol and more like a signal. The optics became even sharper because of how the two men appeared on camera. The Vice President was described as leaving upright, composed, chest out, almost in a cinematic, heroic posture. Trump, by contrast, was shown stumbling, his legs seeming to give way, falling awkwardly, and leaving in a manner the transcript portrays as humiliating and chaotic. In politics, image can wound almost as deeply as bullets. A leader who exits a crisis looking controlled can inherit psychological authority from the moment. A leader who exits looking shaken can lose it, especially if the footage loops endlessly across television and social media. This is where speculation about White House infighting enters the frame. The transcript does not claim proof. It raises suspicion. Why did one figure appear so certain, so steady, so theatrically composed, when the source of the bullets was not yet fully known? Why did Trump, the central target, appear exposed not only physically but symbolically? Those questions gain force because the event itself was already supposed to be one of the most protected spaces in the country outside the White House. If an attacker could breach that environment, then either someone failed badly or someone knew more than the public has been told. That is the shadow hanging over the narrative. And the transcript also challenges the speed with which the lone wolf explanation seemed to harden. In an attempted assassination of a president, investigators normally face intense pressure to identify not only the shooter, but also any financiers, facilitators, ideological handlers, and logistics providers. That is basic counterintelligence logic. So follow the communications, follow the money, follow the access, yet the account presents the opposite impression. that the agencies were in a hurry to close the conceptual frame before all the operational questions were answered. Why, it asks, would investigators show so little visible urgency about identifying a possible accomplice if weapons really were placed in advance inside a staff room? Why would they settle the story architecture before the forensic architecture was fully visible? A further anxiety runs through the transcript, and it is less about this one night than about what comes after. If Alan was not a fringe caricature, but an educated, articulate, ideologically driven man, then his act may be interpreted by some as more than criminal violence. It may be read by unstable admirers as political theater, martyrdom, or a model. And that is the danger of symbolic attacks in fractured societies. The first actor commits the deed, the second actor studies the response, the third actor decides the cost is acceptable. Copycat logic is not abstract. It is one of the most persistent features of modern extremist violence. The transcript therefore asks whether Alan's action could produce a demonstration effect. Could others, furious over war, Gaza, Iran, immigration, or religion, begin to see direct violence against political leadership as meaningful? Could a failed attack still become a successful myth? For Trump personally, the implications are obvious. If a president is seen as both hated and penetrable, then his remaining time in office becomes a permanent security test. Every rally, every hotel ballroom, every rope line, every donor dinner, every public appearance becomes part of a larger risk matrix. For the Republican Party, the implications are electoral as well as protective. Political power depends partly on perceived strength. If the public repeatedly sees Trump as hunted, destabilized, and physically diminished, the effect on morale and campaign imagery could be severe, especially heading toward a midterm environment where confidence and control matter almost as much as policy. The transcript's final interpretation is perhaps its most provocative. It argues that the attack may not have been designed primarily to kill Trump or other officials. It may instead have been intended as a warning, a message, a signal that the line had already been crossed and that future actors might go further. That argument rests on several observations from the account of the distance between the shooter and the stage, the chaotic but incomplete outcome, the fact that the attacker was captured alive, and the possibility that the operation was constructed more for shock than for maximum lethality. In this reading, the event says, "Stop now," or "next time the barrier breaks completely." Whether that interpretation is right remains uncertain. A warning can become a massacre by accident. A failed assassination can look like symbolic theater only because it failed. Intent is always easiest to narrate after the bullets stop. Still, the unresolved issues remain. Why did a highly educated 31-year-old with evident ability and prospects turn toward violence? Why do the logistics described in the transcript suggest support, while the official label suggests solitude? Why did a presidential security perimeter appear, at least from the outside, so porous? And why did the visual aftermath intensify suspicion rather than calm it? These are not small contradictions. They go to motive, method, competence, and trust. They touch the credibility of the agencies, the coherence of the White House, and the temperature of a country already stretched by war, polarization, religion, and fear. The crowd at the hotel heard gunfire. The country heard something else, a system groaning under pressure, a political order so brittle that one armed man in a ballroom can trigger not just panic, but competing stories about conspiracy, collapse, and succession. That is why this incident will not disappear, simply because the suspect is in custody. Arrest does not close the file when the facts still feel misaligned. It only freezes the first frame. If the official version is correct, then the agencies will eventually need to show how a lone actor acquired access, staged weapons, outran pursuit, fired inside a protected venue, and survived long enough to be pinned down alive. If the official version is incomplete, then the unanswered questions will keep multiplying because institutions lose authority when they ask the public to ignore the obvious seams. And those seams are visible. The elite student who became an attacker, the employee break room with alleged weapons waiting inside, the burst of shots that does not fit neatly into the response timeline. The absence or apparent irrelevance of elevated overwatch, the room full of top officials, the vice president's calm exit, the president's stumble, each detail alone can be explained. Together, they form a pattern of doubt, not proof, doubt. That is where the story stands. Not resolved, not stable, not clean. The bullets may have stopped inside the ballroom, but the larger shockwave has only begun to move through the system. And until the full architecture of the attack is clarified, one conclusion remains hard to escape. This was not just a security incident, it was a stress test of presidential protection, institutional credibility, and political legitimacy, all conducted in a matter of seconds under chandeliers, cameras, and live fear. The official investigation may yet answer the major questions. It may confirm that this was a lone actor driven by ideology and grievance, acting without meaningful support. Or it may expose a wider web of access, assistance, and internal failure. At this stage, certainty is cheap. Evidence is not. What is already clear is that the event hit more than one target. It struck the president's image, the public's confidence, and the protective myth surrounding the highest office in the United States. And once that myth cracks, it does not easily seal again. That is why the real story is not only who fired or how many shots were heard or who got out first. The real story is whether the state still understands the threat landscape inside its own walls. Because if it does not, then this night at the Washington Hilton was not an ending. It was a warning shot, or worse, a rehearsal.